Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are. I hope that you have been keeping well and safe. Welcome today to the 5 Whys of Demand Planning and the Agile Digital Workforce. Having with us here, we have 𝗀𝗲𝗀𝗃. He is a consultant, trainer, and facilitator with a national and international client base. John is actually valued for his business acumen and skill in assisting clients with strategic planning, governance, leadership, change management, workforce planning, digital transformation, cost management, and tendering in countries such as Australia, New Zealand, Nigeria, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and more. Over to you, John.
Good, thank you, Christine. And thank you to those that have joined the webinar. It's great that you've overcome the physical constraint of distance and that we're able to do this online. One of the things that we do share is that we're in a world of constant change, and that change is measured in terms of variance. In any industry, in most industries, demand has either dropped significantly or has increased significantly. Across the supply chain, things that we've taken for granted that would be available previously are now not available or are constrained. You try and get something out of the Philippines, almost impossible. Australians are now finding that a number of the medical supplies that they've been used to simply unavailable in the current climate. Now the question becomes, when will that variance change, and what is the variance that's actually driving the inability to get product across borders? So today's an overview of a 2-day workshop that will happen in February. It's really about giving you an overview of the importance of appreciating the link between demand planning in a world of constant change and with variance, which in some cases is predictable, but in other cases is unpredictable. I drew the link between demand planning and agile digital workforce because one of the things we need to consider differently in a time of constant change and major variance is what is our workforce comprised of? How is it structured? What's the in-house part of the workforce? What's the contingent part of the workforce? And when we start to look at managing demand with the workforce, when we manage demand with supply, we've actually got to introduce into that equation output. And we'll come to the 5 Whys of demand planning and the agile digital workforce. The first one is demand variance. The second is our capacity and our utilization. Third is digital transformation. Fourth is output planning. And the last is workforce planning. What factors make it vital to take a systems view of a business? Is it ongoing change? Is it uncertainty and ambiguity? Is it demand variance? Is it customer loyalty? Or is it in fact all of the above? And I'd suggest to you that it is all of the above. Every business is a system. Every business is a system that creates a value stream to turn inputs into outputs. Capacity is the maximum that can be contained in that system, and that might be the amount produced, the amount loaded, the amount stored, but ultimately there is a maximum amount of that capacity. In a service system, we respond to over-demand when we can see that people are left waiting. In a production system, we respond to under-demand by creating inventory and arguably excess inventory in terms of demand. But what's excess? We'll only know that if we understand our variance and we've got a measure that allows us to say our inventory levels should be at X, they're at X minus 10 or X plus 10, and we now then need to look at that whole value stream and the elements of the value stream and what needs to be changed. We know we've got demand variance, and we know we've got issues around customer loyalty and customer disloyalty, not because that's a slight on customers, but simply the amount of choice has changed. And in some cases, in this current pandemic, the choice that we might make is no longer available to us. So capacity and utilization, we need to understand the capacity of our business as a system. We need to understand how much of that capacity we're utilizing and what's a productive level of our capacity to utilize. Effective demand planning ensures the right capacity is utilised at the right level. No system can produce 100%, and no system can afford to carry underutilisation, and no system can meet the needs of its customers if they're left waiting, and as a result of that, their experience is poor. There's some issues there around capacity utilisation, but the whole issue of demand planning and an agile digital workforce is about a value stream. How we create processes and actions to add value to a customer from the initial order to delivery or payment, depending on how that value stream works. And in some instances, we will continue to rely on our in-source staff to do that. In other instances, it'll be a combination of in-source staff and contingent staff. And in other instances, it may be just contingent staff. If you're an Amazon seller, then your staff are largely going to be a contingent staff. The diagram talks about a bottleneck. And what we've got at the moment in terms of the change we're going through and the demand variance is constraints around how we manage to balance our throughput with our demand. We've got physical constraints, and we can recognise those. It's the amount of number of chairs that can sit in an office space. It's the size of machine. It might be the scope of a consulting project. It might be the barriers to entry. It might be boundaries in terms of people not being able to move across state borders anymore. It might be about availability of that physical stock because logistics supply chains have ceased. But ultimately, in terms of demand planning and agile digital workforce, we need to start to focus a lot more on the non-physical constraints. We have with us today someone who worked in the mining industry and could see that one of the real physical constraints was that data was not where it needed to be to inform business intelligence. And so she introduced a non-physical constraint. She managed that physical constraint by creating a service which allowed data to be available anywhere, anytime, and in a timely and accurate manner. So the non-physical constraints are the things we need to think about. And what I'm suggesting to you is that one of those constraints is that we operate in silos. We see things from our specialist point of view, but ultimately we need now to balance the skills and capability of the workforce to match the demand, however it varies, and to deliver quality product and quality outcomes. So we talk about supply and demand. We've actually now got to focus in times of change on supply and output. In the theory of constraints, which is about throughput, there is a reliance on a thing called throughput accounting. And it does something which I think is valuable in terms of mindset. It creates a focus on outputs that generate revenue, not things like work in progress or those things that are parts of systems that we've accepted that arguably don't add value in terms of matching our throughput and output to demand. In all of this, the focus on demand, supply, and now output is a recognition, as the accountants would say, that happiness is a positive cash flow. And the reality is that in any business, revenue is the lifeblood of the organisation. So getting this balance right between our demand planning, our ability to supply, and our output is very significant to the future success and financial sustainability of organisations in the current climate. How does demand variance over the past 6 and 12 months and the next 12 months contribute to business success? This is a chart which is produced by a colleague of mine, Paul Higgins, in an article on LinkedIn called Foresight and Forecasting versus Designing for Uncertainty. I use it because it creates a continuum of where are we at in terms of our forecasting or our planning. At one end, there's ignorance. That is, we do nothing. The possible futures are unknown or unimagined. That's not strategic management. That's not leadership. That's not a survival strategy in a world of constant change and a world in which variance is fairly significant. So we move from ignorance to uncertainty. We try to buy that plane ticket, but is the airline still flying that trip? We try to get home to Australia, 35,000 Australians stranded overseas, but each time we book a flight, the price goes up and then the flight gets cancelled. Or the next thing is risk. Possible futures are known, and we can assign them frequentist probabilities. And that's where forecasting comes in. We say ignorance isn't good enough. Uncertainty is a lack of leadership and a lack of strategy. So let's start to look at our forecasting. Let's start to look at our demand planning, and let's start to look at how we better manage our risk and how it is we may be able to create some degree of certainty. Now, this ties in very much with the agile digital workforce. It flows because if we're going to manage our risk and we're going to get a sense of our possible futures and we're going to assign frequentist probabilities, then we need a skilled group of people sitting around a table and talking about the options, the likely options, the scenarios, and how we will respond depending on which of those scenarios actually came into play. So where do we want to be in the continuum? We want to be down at the resilient end, which is ignorance. Ignorance is bliss. Uncertainty, it's all tough and it's all outside our control. Or risk, it is tough, but it might be a bit more in control than we think. And if we start to use our business intelligence, if we start to use the creatability of our staff, if we create systems where business intelligence is available in a timely and accurate manner, anywhere, anytime, then we will get to the point where we manage our risk, but arguably we'll get to the point where there's greater certainty. And that certainty will be a significant competitive advantage, because it may be we create flexibility in terms of our workforce. It may be that we build an inventory in expectation that when the bottleneck's removed, then demand will be very high. Or it may be that we start to look at some of the things that we've done through our full-time workforce, where there's options to use a contingent workforce that have the skills, the capability, and the tools to significantly add value to who we are and what we do and how we do it. So we know the variance is going to be there. The question becomes, how is it we choose to respond to that variance? Because if our business is in a dynamic environment, is our forecasting as dynamic as that business environment? Because there are some central questions to be asked, one of which is, what products or situations is forecast accuracy a key result area? So I recommend that article to you, Foresight and Forecasting versus Designing for Uncertainty. For those that register in the full workshop, you'll get today's PowerPoint and you'll get a full list of resources. And that's one of the articles that's listed in those resources. So, a significant question at this point in time is, people like me, consultants, talk about a digital business model, and people like me talk about a digitally capable workforce. What do they mean? What is a digital business model? And what is a digital capable workforce? Digital business model is creating value by delivering a positive customer experience using the best of digital technologies. So, value, creating value. Customer experience, we talked about customer loyalty and customer disloyalty before, and we talked about digital technologies. Now, again, in terms of tools, techniques, all of those things that we'll cover in more detail in 2 days, there's lots of software around that can be used to do demand planning. Lots of software around that can be used to do forecasting. Lots of software around that can get the key stakeholders in your organization on the same page. Now, in the 2-day workshop, I'll go through some of those, but ultimately, what's the software doing? It's saying we don't need to manually do what it is that we can do digitally. We don't need to keep manual paper records that become a physical constraint, because we've got the ability to make that information available anywhere at any time. So a digital business model, it uses digital at every opportunity. It's designed to deliver a positive customer experience, and it uses the best of integrated digital technology. Not technology that doesn't talk to one another. The benefit of a digital business model is the software talks to one another and the staff talk to one another, and the decision making is informed and the focus is on creating value. So what's a digital capable workforce? In the future, that might be both humans and robots. In some organisations it will. If you go to South Korea, there's no doubt it does. It's the most roboticised organisation in the world. If you come to a bread baking factory here in Brisbane, then there's a huge, long-standing use of automation and robotics. And of course, that will all continue to proceed at a rapid pace, and at a pace that leaves those that don't embrace the opportunity of a digital business model and a digitally capable workforce to achieve some competitive advantage. So what we're talking about in terms of a digital capable workforce, and a workforce that embraces digital technology, because if it can be digitalized, it should be. It's a workforce that are confident in the use of digital technologies. Now, there's a real opportunity for lots of people to retrain themselves through access to existing digital technologies on the web. For instance, I talked about forecasting tools. It's possible to get trial versions of those. It's been a long time possible to get a trial version of the Microsoft Business Intelligence product. There's a range of tools around, and it's great if staff start to take the initiative to build their knowledge of what's around and then build their skills in using what's around, because ultimately that's a skill that can be translated into the workforce, or it can be a skill that makes a difference between them getting a employable role, whether it's a staff person or an outsourced person or a contingent worker, and not getting it. So ultimately, a digitally capable workforce understands value from a customer perspective. They think value using using a value stream approach, and they define value by ongoing cross-functional collaboration. So, summary, gone up a bit, boom, boom, sorry about that. So, digital transformation, the agility to embrace digital change seamlessly at your fingertips. The reality is that in this day and age, digital transformation happens here. And it happens in the hands of each of us, and it happens at an increasing level in each day. Digital first culture, there's a digital option, embrace it. One of the things that digital transformation allows is to integrate customer-facing and internal functions and overcome the cancer of silos. That view that's held by one of the silos as being most important and beyond discussion suddenly becomes something that can be recognised as important, but its importance may be balanced against things that are equally important, or that may be even more important. So in digital transformation, cross-functional collaboration is an expectation, it's not an option. Why? Because people are singing from the same hymn sheet. They have access to the same data. They have access to the same reporting. They have access to that data which is timely and accurate. They have access to that data which can be accessed anywhere at any time if it's in the cloud. And ultimately, digital transformation really encourages a very good look at the workforce to do a capability analysis. And part of that is looking at who it is we need to who it is we need to retain, because our core staff will always be very important and critical to our success. Who it is that we need to develop, and it might be simply getting them, teaching them to use a tool that they haven't used before, or to start to look at moving data from one platform into another, and then start to play with how that data is used and what scenarios can be done. Lots of cases, it's good to recruit staff that are digitally capable. Why? Because they bring that mindset of how can I extend this a bit further? How can I do this better? And they'll also be good at teaching and coaching people to use the tools, because their expectation is it's better for their colleagues to know how to use the tools and work with them than for them to have to do for their colleagues what it is the colleagues are paid to do. So recruitment, and then we've got the motivation and the reward. How is it we motivate staff to add value? How is it we motivate staff to better understand customer expectations? How is it that we motivate staff to better meet customer expectations and deliver a positive customer experience? And part of that would be, if we get it right and we create the value, then the scope for the system to reward staff increases as a result of it. Christine, can we do a poll here? Have we got the poll on output planning?
Sure.
So we're asking you to vote on what are the most important elements of output planning? Integrated people, data and infrastructure, timely and accurate data, capable and motivated staff, applied demand and supply forecasting, predictive analysis tools. Is it all the above? And are there other things that you might add? So we ask you to go ahead and complete this little poll for us, please, and we'll see what it is that people have got to say about the most important elements of output planning.
I think there are still two more who hasn't voted. But maybe John, you just want to go ahead to.
Well, I was interested to see the results, Christine, because I think it's important that we see what's the view of people, and whether my focus on business intelligence, my focus on overcoming physical constraints to have data available anywhere, anytime, and whether my focus on looking at recruiting and developing and retaining staff is shared by those that are sitting in today.
Okay, so we have 10 persons who says all of the above. Out of the
all of the above.
Almost everyone we have here. So only one who says timely and accurate data, and another one applied demand and supply forecasting.
Okay, let me throw in a couple of others, and then people are welcome through the chat screen to propose anything that I haven't included. Thanks for taking that away. Oh, there we go. So there's the results.
Yep.
All of the above. I agree, it is all of the above, but each of these elements is important. There are a couple of other things that I wanted to add to it. The first is futures thinking. That ultimately we've got to get beyond thinking about today and tomorrow to start to look at least in units of 3 months, and for at least a minimum of 8 periods of 3 months. That is 2 years. Why? Because things will change. Why? Because we'll create some assumptions in our forecasting that it's important that we define. Why? Because when things change, we'll know which assumptions need to be changed, and we'll get better at forecasting and demand planning because we'll learn from our own experience. So the other element that I would add to is understanding the operational tolerance for our forecasts. No one's talking about certainty in a world of constant change. We're talking about managing the risk and getting good at forecasting. But it is really important that we start to understand the operational tolerance for forecast errors. There will be errors. We'll learn from those errors. We'll get better. but ultimately we need to know what's the tolerance. There is no point in producing a volume well in excess of demand because we've optimistically forecast that everything's going to be rosy tomorrow, and if we make it, then they'll buy it. It's just not realistic. The other is to continue to validate our forecast quality and accuracy. Get started at forecasting, get better. But you get better because people sit around the table and say, why are we so far out? Was there a predictable variance that we missed? Was there an unpredictable variance that happened last month that actually might be predictable next month or the month after that? How is it that we continue to test the forecast? And if it's right, instead of saying we've struck gold and it's going to be right forevermore, then we stand back and say, how do we get better at this? I draw an analogy between critical success factors and KPIs. I've seen people really struggle with those when they first embrace them. But when I go back 12 months, 24, 36 months later, I see they've refined both their critical success factors and their KPIs. Why? Because they know what they're looking for. And the same too with demand planning, your forecasting and your predictive analysis. You'll get better at understanding those things that may have given you one response in the early days that gives you a mature or more sophisticated response in the later days. So it is all of the above. Futures thinking is also important. Understanding operational tolerance for forecast error is important. And continually validating the quality and accuracy of our forecasting is also important. So I'll go back to a shared screen. And there's some really important elements here around demand planning that are going to be significant in determining the assumptions that you make, the criteria that you set, and the measures that you take. So I said before, any business is a system. A business model is about converting inputs to outputs to match throughput to demand and sales at a margin to ensure profitability. But in output planning, we've got to be realistic about our system. What is our output capacity? What is our throughput? What's our productivity? How much work do we have in progress? And is there a way in which we can concertina some of that? Because in terms of throughput accounting, we understand that the focus is on outputs that deliver revenue, not work in progress or inventory that sits and waits for a buyer. So output, throughput, productivity, work in progress. Then there's the issue of quality. Reverse supply chain is having to create a supply chain to bring back into the business those things which have been sold before. And why are they coming back? Because our quality is not good enough, because we haven't supplied what was delivered, because we didn't supply sufficient quantity of what we delivered, because we supplied the wrong size against what the order was. So quality becomes a very significant issue in terms of output planning, because there's no point getting an output that is poor quality that's going to come back into our reverse supply chain. Downtime, machine downtime. Again, the forecasting tools, wonderful tools around maintenance and predictive maintenance. And like demand planning, it's one of those things that can really help us to understand how it is we balance the workforce with our need to spend some time in preventative maintenance and corrective maintenance. When Ford introduced an automated production shop, Henry was said to have said to the union official, you know, they get here on time, they don't have meetings, and they produce at a regular rate. And the union official's response was, Henry, that's all true, but they don't buy cars. So we do need meetings, but the question is, how many meetings do we have? How productive are they? How much time do they take away from our utilisation of our staff capability that detracts from the output that we're able to achieve? And then there's
John,
training, and then
sorry,
there's
stop you
lead.
there, John. We're
Yep.
not able to see a screen.
Sorry?
The PowerPoint is not visible.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were sharing the. Is that better?
Yes. Yeah, that works.
Ah, that's okay. All right. So, and you've got the full version of the. Yep. So the criteria again in terms of output planning got to be realistic. We've got to be realistic around what it is that we can produce based on the tools that we use, based on the assets that we use, based on the workforce that we've got, based on our ability to outsource some of those things, if that's a good use of time, based on our ability to digitalize processes that have been manual processes for long periods of time. So output planning is important. Why? Because we want to balance our demand with not just our supply, but our output. Why? Because we want to use the workforce effectively, whether it's our in-house or whether it's contingent workforce, to give us the ability to match demand or match throughput to demand. One of the questions I've asked clients over 20 years of consulting is, why does your base roster have that number of staff with that skill level on those days for those hours? I've actually never come across an organisation that's been able to answer that. And it's because we change over time. We change incrementally, and we respond to waiting to say we've got a over demand for a particular function, so we'll put someone into that area without actually saying, hang on, across the workforce, where is the capacity and how much of that capacity are we utilising? So I'm not looking for an answer to you for this question today because we've got very short time, but have a think about it. Why does your base roster have that number of staff with that skill level on those days for those hours? Is your workforce planning delivering the right staff in the right place for the right amount of time with the right capability, with the right experience and the right motivation? Now, Christine, I think we've got another poll. Can we go to the poll?
Sure, give me a minute.
Okay. Oh, minutes are precious. We've got to utilize our time very, very effectively.
Hold on, let me just. Okay, here we go. Okay.
In your organisation, are workforce structure and size decisions based on what was a best guess at the start of the business? Oh, we've got two of the same options, A and B.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. B should be incremental change over time. So best guess at the start, incremental change over time, historical demand in the previous 12 to 36 months, which may or may not be a future indicator, or other. And if you say other, then we'll be looking for you to give us some distinction. So the question that I didn't ask you was, what a question I asked you to reflect on was, why does your base roster have that number of staff with that skill level on those days or those hours? And the different question becomes, and we can put the poll back up for Christine.
Okay, the poll is still ongoing.
Okay, all right, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
So,
let's get people to respond to that.
Yeah, there's 7 responding.
Okay.
Yeah. Hold on. And then 9. Just waiting for them to complete before I end the poll and share the results.
Yep.
Okay, I think I'll end the polling now and share the results. Yeah, here you go.
Okay. So no one's involved with the startup. I assume B is incremental change over time. C is historical demand. So historical demands come out very, very heavily in front. What I'm interested to know is, for the 64% or the 7 that responded to that, has that historical demand been reacting to particular parts of the business where there's been need for more staff? Or has it been looking across the business and saying, we can trim a few people in the dispatch area because our volumes aren't at the same level, or the way in which we are dispatching them now is much better mechanised and much better automated, and we actually need less manpower in that particular area. So we're not going to have the scope to address that, but the big question is historical demand the previous 12 to 6 months reacting to waiting or physical representations of inability to meet demand? Or is it reacting to say our workforce is dynamic and we need to continue to manage our workforce and recognise that the silos don't remain as statues or things that are carved in stone, that the silos are part of an organisation that contributes to our ability to add value in a value stream, and we need a bit more flexibility. And one of the things I'd suggest to you is that embracing digital transformation will generally provide people with a wider view of the value stream, of their role, and how they contribute to the business. And so it is a fantastic opportunity to start to get rid of some of those silos and invite some informed views of specialists in areas outside their specialisation, but very much within their knowledge of the customer and very much within their knowledge of what the customer experience should be and how the customer experience can be enhanced. So the last one, other. Can we go back to the poll, Christine? Can I ask whoever did other that they use the chat room to indicate what it was that, it's only one person, but I'd be really very interested to know what it is that has driven the structure and size of your workforce. Because it may be that it's a recognition that a lot of the functions can be achieved through a contingent workforce, or a lot of the functions can be outsourced and in some cases offshored. So if we can have an indication from the person that chose other, that would be great. And for those that's historical demand, I just really challenge you to have a think about whether that historical demand is a reactive response to more staff in part of the organisation, rather than a look across the organisation and shifting resources into areas of higher demand and higher value and higher productivity. So I'll close that now. Christine, did we get a response from the person that said other?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. All right, so I'll move on. Okay. So let's get back to one of the slides that I had earlier, because I want to highlight this issue of, is this idle talk, or is it about demand variance and managing our workforce based on that demand variance? Where are we at the ignorance stage? I suspect not. If you're here today, I suspect that you understand that we do need to be more agile in terms of our workforce planning. We need to be more agile in terms of the capability of our staff. We do need to be more agile in considering what remains in-house and what's outsourced. We do need to be agile in considering whether it's the workforce is human and automated or human, robotic and automated. And we also need to think then about, well, if we've moved beyond ignorance to uncertainty, we're here because we live in uncertain times. I mentioned before that people in Australia are getting access to medical supplies. I've mentioned to Christine that I wasn't aware before the pandemic that the major supplier of surgical gloves in the world was Malaysia. And what happened when the pandemic came was that Malaysia put a upper limit on the number of surgical gloves that they would export overseas. And so those customers that were used to placing an order and having it fulfilled suddenly discovered that the order wasn't going to be fulfilled because a large part of the productive capacity was being kept and stored in-house for the needs of Malaysia. So the other side of that then was, how does a country like Australia manage the uncertainty of supply in a global economy? If we can't get those gloves from Malaysia, what are the alternative sources? What would it take for us to produce gloves in Australia? What level of inventory do we need to hold in Australia in the event that the pandemic gets worse? And each country is going through similar things around saying, we're not ignorant about pandemics anymore. If we're in management and we're leaders, then we've got to start to look at understanding the degree of uncertainty, understanding the demand variance, understanding the need to be a bit more strategic in terms of looking at what is the risk, how do we quantify the risk, and how do we manage the risk. No one can promise you certainty. What I can promise you is, if you get better at demand planning, if you use software tools that are integrated in your existing IT systems, if you digitally transform your organization and get people out of their silos to looking at data and critical analysis of data and better and informed decision making, because you've got that ability to access that data anywhere, anytime online, then you're better managing your risk. You're better at understanding opportunity and risk, and some of that opportunity may allow you to create some certainty. So what's the opportunity and risk? Let me give you a good example. Barbados has a certain number of tourists per year. When the pandemic came, they realized that there are a lot of remote workers that would actually like the opportunity to live in Barbados. So they created a flexible visa system. They ensured that people in quarantine had access to balconies and outside areas. They assured people that the internet capability was very high, and they expedited the visa application system. Why? Because if people wanted to move around the world and they could work from anywhere, then Barbados wanted that multiplier effect of the economic activity generated by bringing skilled remote workers in to work from Barbados. They could ensure access to Internet of Things. They could assure the safety of people. They could assure that the medical system had the capability to deal with the number of cases of COVID they had at that time. And they could see that here was an opportunity to reposition Barbados in the world in a way that gave them competitive advantage in terms of this new growing number of remote workers that might want to be somewhere nice in the summer and that might want to manage their risk. And they also might want to know that it's easy to get that visa to get access to the place, to get in and out of the place, and to travel where people outside Barbados were willing and able to get them to. So, demand planning and an agile digital workforce. We need to plan better. We need workforces that allow us to respond in an agile way to the business intelligence that we're capable of having in a timely and accurate manner if we transform our organizations. We need staff that embrace digital tools and a whole digital first philosophy. And the best we can do is manage risk. And the good managers will create opportunity. In some cases, the good managers will create certainty. In lots of cases, the good managers, the good leaders will appreciate the extent to which they've managed their risk against those that live with uncertainty because they didn't demand plan, those that were stuck with uncertainty because their workforce wasn't able to step up to what makes you competitive in an international environment. And that ignorance ultimately will come back to haunt those who haven't responded to the opportunity of a pandemic, adjusted their business model to be able to balance their inputs with their outputs and meet customers' needs by matching throughput to demand. So, Christine, I think that's enough from me now. Happy to take any questions, and be good for you to give people some insight around what's the incentive to move from today to a full training program with a lot more case studies, a lot more depth, a lot more exercises, and a strategic plan to better match demand with an agile digital workforce in a way that creates customer loyalty, delivers a positive customer experience, and contributes to the financial sustainability of the business.
Sure. Could you do me a favor and go to the slide with the workshop? I think to the end. Yeah. Yes. Here. So everyone, John will be hosting this course on demand planning and the agile digital workforce. This will be an expansion of today's webinar, and it's going to be a 2-day, 4-hourly program. Okay, and you will receive tools, techniques, and case studies from John. What we will do is my colleague Vishnu will be reaching out to you within the next 24 hours to sign up for this course. If you sign up within the next 24 hours, you'll get a 20% discount off the regular fee. And then after that, you will get 10% discount. So the next 24 hours is crucial for you to get that 20% discount. Okay, moving on, I would also like to open up the floor for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A or the chat box. Otherwise, you can raise your hand and we can put you on screen or allow you to talk. Any questions?
Covered it all in 45 minutes.
If there are no questions right now yet, let me ask John. I just want to know what is the difference between an agile workforce and an agile digital workforce? I mean, there's just a difference of one word, but what does that one word mean?
It is significant. I mean, an agile workforce is change ready. It can respond to the need to embrace change as that need is recognised. An agile digital workforce will recognise that need more quickly. It will have the business intelligence at their fingertips. It will understand the logic of change because it's got the information to understand why the change is being made. And it will buy into the change and then ultimately take ownership of the change, because an agile digital workforce understands that they're using the best of digital technology to bring one another onto the same page to add value, and that that value is defined by what they know from the time inaccurate data that's at their fingertips. So an agile workforce is great, but how long does it take to get there to make the changes that are required? An agile digital workforce embraces continuous improvement, has the information to make more informed decisions, understands the logic of those decisions, and takes ownership to make those decisions happen.
Right. Thank you, John. My next question has more to do with the pandemic. So is demand variance just an outcome of the pandemic and likely to reduce post-pandemic? What are your thoughts on this?
Don't I love optimists? The global financial crisis, globalization, digital transformation, China as a global trader, COVID-19, they're all examples of the pace and scale of change. Unbridled optimism may suggest the pace of change will reduce and demand variance will be less important in the foreseeable future. I think reality suggests change is a constant. Managing demand variance has become a critical success factor for businesses anywhere in the world. So if someone can stop the pace of change, then they should open a visa scheme to attract people to where they are. I don't think that's the nature of the world we live in. I mean, even today, we've seen a huge change in a leader in the free world, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America. That will have enormous change across a whole range of economies and communities, not just in the United States, but outside the United States. In Australia, we've had, we change our prime ministers almost more often than we change our underpants. That's the nature of change. It's the world we live in, and my demand planning, my forecasting, my predictive analysis doesn't suggest that it's likely to change in the foreseeable future.
Right. And last question from me, is forecasting any more than a best guess?
Well, before I answer that question, I just highlight this particular slide of the workforce, the unburdened workforce, which is automated, the skilled workforce, which is planning, the agile workforce, which is about execution, and the vital workforce, which is about innovating. The vital workforce is a competitive advantage, and it's a competitive advantage driven by business intelligence. But let me jump up a few slides to address your question. Okay. So on the continuum from ignorance to certainty, uncertainty is best managed by using business intelligence plus key stakeholders informed views to forecast the future, to take that future mindset. Variance, ratios and trends all contribute to quality forecasting and managing uncertainty. Planning can't deliver certainty, but it can reduce complexity and managing risk. So is forecasting more than the best guess? Yes, it's a lot more, because you've got much more data on which to make your decisions, because you've got many more key stakeholders sitting around and doing the analysis and sharing the assumptions and sharing their analysis, and then starting to look at what that means in terms of how they convert whatever strategy they adopt into operations. So much more than the best guess. And in the current world without forecasting, it's hard to see that you won't be at one or other end of the spectrum. One end is you simply haven't got the supply to meet the demand and your customers go somewhere else. The other is you've got too much supply to meet demand and you've got cash tied up in your inventory. And that's not productive for anyone. I mean, what's the right level of inventory? Your forecasting will tell you that. But you'll know when you've got too much inventory because it's more than you need and it's growing, and your resource decision can be about more inventory space rather than how to better manage your inventory.
Thank you, John. I think that's all the questions.
And Christine, we didn't get that.
Good question from Anvika. What kind of models are used for demand forecasting? Any use case that can be shared where the organization moved from resilience to planning?
Yes, we can do that, and we will do that. I actually sat in a webinar today where someone else was talking about their own experience. In terms of the tools, I mentioned to you that there's a whole variety of software tools. You know, some of the stuff I've been looking at in terms of software, just mentioned some brands: Beeline, SAP's Fieldglass, Workday Adaptive Planning. There's lots out there, and in the end, it's about matching the tool with the capability of staff. It's about ensuring that the tool integrates with your existing software system, and it's about providing data out of the tool in a way that creates meaning for staff and allows a cross-functional meeting to make really good decisions based on that. But software of itself is not the solution. There's a real cultural element here. The cultural element is that we need to embrace a future mindset. The cultural element is we need to make decisions based on business intelligence. The issue becomes about timely and accurate data to assist key stakeholders to collectively make decisions around, if these are the options, these are the scenarios, what's the best option for us to pursue at this point in time? So the tools are important, but fundamentally we are talking about a shift in mindset from uncritical, we simply react to the market and the way it is, to we're going to manage our risk, we're going to get good at forecasting, we're going to recognise that we need to continue to challenge ourselves about the quality of our forecasting, but ultimately we want to be down the end of the spectrum where we're managing our risk and creating the highest level of certainty that's possible, without any false confidence that certainty is is as continuous as change.
Right. 𝗦𝗂𝗃, I hope that answered the question. She follow up with another question. What are the few things that help develop the future mindset or set of questions that would aid the shift in mindset?
Okay. I think it's good to look at your demand variance over the last 12 months. Let's say the pandemic came across us in March, but let's take the calendar year from March 2020 to a 12-month period, and then start to look at what output we produced over that period of time and match it against our demand over that period of time. So if we're uncritical about demand variance and we produce that level of output, how consistent was that level of output, and how variable was the demand over that period of time? I mean, in manufacturing in years gone by, production managers would simply say, we'll produce to the capacity of our machines. In the new world, it simply doesn't happen. We've got to be better at demand planning and start to get a sense of the variance that you've actually coped with over time, and understand whether that's led to customers being unhappy because they're waiting, or that your inventory levels are well above where they should be, and you had some ability to impact those inventory levels long before you had that much money tied up in your inventory. So I think you can use your own example of change. And we do this in change management, of say to people, well, let's look at the changes over the last 5 years. And people do this list of changes. And you say, well, that's pretty impressive that you've managed all of that. And people say, yeah, it is actually pretty impressive. We'd never really thought about it like that. So I think use your business intelligence to look at your demand planning versus your output, and what's happened over that period of time, and how, given what you know now, you might have got less of a difference between those two things, and how it is you might have used some business intelligence or some software tools to have got better results than you did over that last 12 months.
Okay, I think, yeah, she felt that was really insightful. So we have one question from Juliana. Her question is, what is better, retraining the existing workforce or hiring new ones?
I'm sorry, can I see that question?
It's earlier. So it is, yeah, it's what is better. Let me just, hold on. I'm just going to retype this to you.
Okay. What is better, retrain the existing workforce or hire? Workforces aren't a greenfield site. You've got some capable people in every workforce, and it's important that you identify which of those that you want to retain. And some of them you retain because they're great at what they're doing and they don't need to do any better. But some you retain because they're open to training, they like the digital first approach, and they're prepared to invest in their own development around use of digital tools. On top of that, if you're going to bring in significant digital tools that are a long way ahead of where your current workforce operates at, then I'd certainly be looking at recruiting someone who's skilled at using that software. Let me give you an example. I worked with a client recently who focused very much on their front of house and very little on their back of house. So the warehouse was almost like it was a separate entity. It was in the same building. It's just they had a door closed as though, you know, a completely different operation. And I said to them, would it be unfair to say your warehouse operation hasn't changed at all in the last 20 years? And the response was probably 25. Now I was shocked. So if they haven't changed in 20 or 25 years, don't introduce a sophisticated tool that's far above the capability of staff. Either train someone in the use of the tool and give them some time off the job, or bring in someone that's using the tool that can build the skills and the confidence of others, or choose a simpler tool at the start, knowing that at some stage you will upgrade to a better tool. But this whole issue of demand planning and agile digital workforce, it's not about saying the staff are no good, therefore we need to start again. It's about having some faith and some trust in people that are there who understand the business and enhancing their understanding, their motivation, their commitment by an overlay of tools which allow the demand planning to be better and allow the organisation to move forward, recognising that the future reflects the past less now than it perhaps ever has in our lifetimes.
Okay, I think that is all the questions that we have for today. Any last words, John?
I commend people for sitting in today. It is important. It's future mindset is really going to be the key to financially sustainable businesses. We can't stop the change. The pace may vary, but in terms of our own organisation and our own demand, we've got to get better at understanding it. We've got to get better at forecasting. And the way we're going to do it is to use tools that we mightn't use now, that we add to our existing tool set. And the way we're going to do is to bring our staff with us. Now, whether that's all the existing staff or whether it's some of the existing staff and recruiting those that can take us forward, that's a decision for each organisation to make. But in the continuum that I talked about before, the last thing that we want is to be down at the end where we simply say we're flotsam in a whirlpool, and where the whirlpool takes us is beyond our control. And if it sinks us, well, we'll have to live with that. We can do better than that. We've got better leaders in business. We've got better managers in business. We've got the ability to integrate our people with our infrastructure, with our information, and create better workforces that are better at delivering customer experiences. So whatever you do from today, really love to have you in the 2-day program. But this isn't the end, this is the beginning. You've got to think differently about how you equip the intellectual perception of your business and how it needs to conduct itself, or conceptually, intellectually, to start to make some change to say we can understand the variance, we can manage the variance much better than we have. And we've had some ideas today that show us how we might do that.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you all for tuning in today. We hope to see you in the course next month. See you. Bye. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Good on you.